What's going on, everybody? Hope everyone had a good Christmas. Enjoy some time with family, friends. We do have a football game to recap. Lots to talk about with this Steelers Chiefs game. Third game losing streak, obviously extremely disappointing. Baltimore's now reclaimed the AFC North lead. Steelers are currently in the wild card. They've got the 5 spot as of right now. Looking like they're probably going to be headed to Houston, but it does kind of depend on the outcome of not just the games this weekend with the Chargers and the Broncos, those teams still to play, but also like what happens next week. But it seems like they're going to be on the road for the first round of the playoffs. I don't think a matchup with Houston is a bad thing necessarily, given the way that they're playing. But I also think that I speak for probably everyone that would have liked to have seen them get a home playoff game for selfish reasons, and I just think it's easier when you at least get to play one at home, especially with the way the teams played at home versus on the road. But the good news is, this team, all of us, honestly, fans included, get a little bit of a break to get some rest and hopefully reset from kind of what's taken place in the last 12 days or so. But before we get started, if you could just hit that like button, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, all that stuff's greatly appreciated on my end. And then also, I'm just kind of curious, like a little temperature check here for you guys. What's the number one thing you're concerned about right now? Is it offensive related? Is it defensive related? Coaching related? Be as specific or as generic as you want to be. But I just kind of hopefully getting some level-headed responses to see like what your all's kind of thoughts are as we kind of come out of this pretty tough 3-game stretch. As far as the game itself, it kind of got out of hand in the second half, kind of like the last 2 weeks have, where it's not like they got boat raced from the opening kickoff, but in the second half, like the opposing teams kind of just were able to kind of pull away for one reason or another. I think really the big thing for me comes down to the quarterback play. The Steelers just had no answer for Mahomes, man. Like really unfortunate, just because, like I said, I don't think he's been the best quarterback in the NFL this year, but I think that he's potentially maybe the greatest quarterback of all time. And this Kansas City Chiefs team is playing some good ball. He's starting to kind of peak at the right time. But I thought that a couple things were kind of notable to talk about with Mahomes and the way that he played yesterday. Just in terms of like his response to pressure, they only got pressure on 7 of his dropbacks. And the reason for that is because he was getting rid of the ball in 2.33 seconds. According to Next Gen Stats, that was the second quickest game of his entire career. He just peppered the Steelers with underneath throws, getting the ball out extremely quickly. They utilized a lot of stuff in terms of like the RPO game, getting the ball out quick, kind of trying to neutralize the Steelers pass rush. I even think that there were definitely times where guys up front were winning their individual matchups. TJ forced a hold or 2. I thought Cam Hayward, anytime he got the opportunity to go one-on-one with the left guard that they had in there in place of Joe Thuney, who was kicked out to left tackle, won those one-on-one matchups. They were given Joe Thuney on the left side a little bit of help with Alex Highsmith via chips, some things like that. But, I mean, the pass rush is not going to be very effective like when the ball is coming out, in under 2 seconds. And I think that really speaks to, it's good game planning on the behalf of Andy Reid, the Chiefs, coaching staff, things like that. And the Steelers just didn't do a good enough job adjusting. We talked about this in the preview, but with this Chiefs offense, just the way it is, it's brutally efficient. They want to kind of nickel and dime and bleed you out one first down at a time. And I thought that was pretty much exactly what happened, to be honest with you. You look at some of the ways that they were able to move the ball. I mean, Mahomes in this game, he only averaged 5.7 yards, average depth of target, but he averaged 8.4 yards per dropback. He didn't take a single sack in this game, and that's always notable because the Steelers like to beat teams. They want to, just demolish you up front and get after the quarterback. Mahomes didn't allow that to happen. And even when the ball didn't come out quick, he made a couple plays out of structure that I thought were kind of difference makers in this one as well. As is typical Mahomes fashion, it's just really frustrating because, thankfully they haven't seen him, I guess, as much as they've seen, like they had to see Brady. But it's just really frustrating from my perspective to have to deal with Brady for 2 decades. And then this dude comes along and pretty much just like kind of takes the crown. This is the 4th time that the Steelers have seen Mahomes in his career. And he is now, I'm just going to read out the stats because I tweeted him out yesterday. He's 105 of 135 for 1,300 yards, 9.68 yards per attempt, 17 touchdowns, 1 interception. 143.53 passer rating. So Mahomes is great against he's good against pretty much everybody, but like this is a different type of level of dominance that he's kind of put on the Steelers. And honestly, like those numbers probably don't even tell the whole story because like I think 3 of those 4 matchups he didn't even throw, like he wasn't even really throwing the ball in the fourth quarter because I think they've only really played him tight one time, and I think that was the very first game, one of the first games of his career in like 2018, I guess. I think him and Ben had a game where they each scored like 11 touchdowns or something like that total. But regardless, they just didn't have any answer. I thought Casey did some things that opposing teams have kind of done to the Steelers defense over the last couple of weeks. You look at the first touchdown, they got up to the line of scrimmage quickly. They used tempo, get an easy touchdown, putting Xavier Worthy out of the backfield, kind of run a little mesh rail concept. Fitzpatrick's a little late to kind of peel off to the rail, get the ball to him out in space. And then let's see, the touchdown to Kelsey, that was the record breaker for him. The Steelers are playing a little like Tampa 2, and Herbig kind of slants inside a little bit. Now, whether they were trying to run a little stunt or whatever is, I'd have to go back and watch it again. But they're running Tampa 2, and then as Mahomes breaks the pocket, they just don't plaster to their guys that are in their zone, and then Kelsey ends up wide open down the middle of the field. And I know a lot of players really expressed some frustrations with that, like out after the game, just in terms of like the adjustments that the Chiefs made. It seemed like the Steelers they prepared for like what was coming, but they just didn't execute once again. And I think some of that definitely comes down to coaching. I think that there probably needs to be some personnel decisions made moving forward. The first thing that I would probably do is I'd probably start playing Beanie Bishop again at slot cornerback. I just think that Cam Sutton has been involved in far too many miscommunications, coverage busts, things like that. And he's not the only one necessarily in the back end that's struggling with those sorts of things right now. But you can't allow a team like this to go 4 for 5 in the red zone, especially because the Chiefs have struggled, oddly enough, in the red zone this season. But red zone defense kind of fallen off the past couple of weeks. Defense in general has fallen off. I would probably look to play Beanie Bishop down the stretch, just because if Sutton's not going to give you the reliability in terms of like the above the neck stuff with your flexibility in the back end, being able to play these different types of zone coverages and maybe disguise some things. If he's blowing coverages, I mean, athletically, we've kind of seen what that looks like when they have to play man. When he's in the game, he just can't really run anymore. So I would probably make that adjustment coming out of this kind of mini bye. Not that that's going to necessarily be a savior. I think the slot cornerback position was something that I kind of wondered if this was going to come back to bite the Steelers in the behind over the course of the season. It kind of has, but that's more of an off-season problem. In the meantime, I would just probably pivot to Bishops and see if he can give you something over these last couple of weeks. But that's really all I've got on the defense, man. Like it really wasn't all that close. They didn't really put up a ton of resistance. They did stop the run okay. I mean, they had a 37% rushing success rate from the Chiefs' perspective. That's not, anything crazy. So, I mean, it was really just Mahomes in the quick passing game. They just didn't really have an answer on that end. And, they only really hit the one ball over the top of their heads, that Justin Watson play that he beat Dante Jackson deep. But that's just kind of the way it goes. I mean, 6.7 yards per play for the Chiefs. It's not good enough, man. It's just not good enough at all. Offensively, I did think the Steelers did some good things running the football. So that was kind of nice. I thought in the first half alone, like Jaylen Warren had played pretty well. I thought he was a bright spot on an otherwise kind of disappointing day overall. Warren continues to run hard. I think they did some good things in terms of, moving the Chiefs like defensive linemen off the ball. I thought the Chiefs kind of stalled some of that stuff out in the second half as the Steelers kind of struggled to get their footing and sustain drives. But there's definitely been, I'll say this, there's been a little bit of encouraging stuff with the run game the past 2 weeks. Now, that's something that I really want to see continue to see if they can lean on that a little bit more down the stretch. And I think they're definitely going to need that if they're going to make any type of noise in the playoffs. But they finished the game with a 46% rushing success rate. I'm not really sure, like, you'd have to parse out some, like, garbage time numbers from all this stuff. Like I said, in the fourth quarter, the game was over. So I'd have to do some finagling with the numbers. But really just, I thought the couple plays in particular that come to mind that were just killers. In the first half, they go down and throw the red zone interception. Russ has turned the ball over in the red zone back-to-back weeks now. Yeah, back-to-back weeks now. That is not completely on him necessarily, but at the same time, it's still an inexcusable kind of mistake to make it that point. I mean, they're down 13-0. They're on the doorstep of making that a one-score game. Basically what's happening is they're really just running a variation of like four verts. They're trying to get to a four strong look. Pickens is on the backside. Now, like anytime you get like cloud coverage, so if a team is playing like cover two, normally if you're the single wide receiver or the number one wide receiver closest to the sideline, whatever your route is normally going to convert to a fade. And the reason is because you're trying to widen those safeties a lot of the time to try to get something up the pipe or up the middle. And that's what they're trying to do with Freiermuth right there. Pickens, I don't know if I want to say he ran the wrong route or if he didn't run a route at all. I'm not really sure what that route that he ran is. Almost looks like kind of a 50%-ish hitch route, a curl. I don't really know. But he doesn't carry it up the sideline, and there's not a player there to kind of hold that backside safety, Justin Reed, for kind of coming to the middle of the field. He gets like the easiest interception of his life because Russ doesn't confirm that the safety's out of the way, and it's just a really unfortunate turnover. Like those types of mistakes, you just can't make those against teams that are 14-1. Like you're just not going to come back for those. Those are just killers. And then, I think the other thing was like pass protection was a little bit an issue. The Steelers tackles individually both took some really rough losses in 1v1 spots. I also think that Russ did a pretty poor job of managing the pocket. Just really from the jump, I thought he looked kind of jumpy. You look at some of the numbers. I mean, he had a 25% pressure to sack rate. He was pressured, I think, 20 times. I'm trying to find the number. He was pressured 20 times on the day, took 5 sacks, but 3.02 time to throw. So, I mean, holding the ball a little bit too long, I think, in some instances. And they just really didn't have that explosive play element. They got the one deep ball to George, I think, in the first half. He made a really nice grab, really nice throw, too. But really not much to speak of in terms of, like, downfield passing. They got some, run after catch opportunities, like, late in the game. But this offense kind of like with the passing game. I know I have seen the clip on Hard Knocks when the Ravens were talking about it, but it's all threes and layups. It just feels like they're checking go balls or they're throwing a check down. And like I think that's why the passing game and the offense in general just feels so volatile. Like it looks good in certain spots when you're getting those explosive plays and when you're able to find Pickens one-on-one. But when teams are able to take that away, whether they're like kind of clouding to his side or kind of putting a safety over the top of him, it's kind of like one of those things where it's like, what else do you got? And I think some penalties definitely played a part in this game too. The Steelers weren't penalized very often. The Chiefs were actually penalized, I think, twice as much. But when some of those penalties happened, I thought were killers. Like Pickens wins on a slant, I think, to convert on third down. That one comes back early in the game. I think right before that interception, Jaylen Warren actually scores in the end zone off a really nice run. Darnell Washington gets called for a hold to bring that one back, and I think they turned the ball over a couple plays later or something like that, if I remember correctly. So, I mean, just shooting themselves in the foot, not executing enough. Like Freiermuth has, he gets stripped by Trent McDuffie late in the rep on a play that, that one's even more frustrating, I think, from his perspective, too, because it's like it's a check down on third and extra long. Like, you're not going to get the first down anyway. So it's just a killer. You're just giving up field position by, letting him strip you. But it is what it is, man. I mean, I think it's definitely a tough loss. I think the big thing isn't necessarily that they lost to these 3 games because, I mean, the last 3 weeks are, in my opinion, like top 5 teams in the NFL. Like if you're talking about like the 5 true contenders, I kind of said like the top 4 were pretty much set in stone. I think obviously the Chiefs, the Bills, they've got Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes. Those are always going to be guys that are going to be in it. And I think in the NFC, you look at the way Philly's constructed, the way Detroit's constructed from a roster perspective, both those teams deserve to be in that conversation. And then I kind of was holding Baltimore out of that conversation up until a couple weeks ago because I wanted to see like if the changes that they made on defense were actually going to stick, and they have. So I think that Baltimore deserves to be in that conversation. But neither here nor there. I think if you look at Kansas City, you look at Buffalo, you look at Baltimore, like all those teams are peaking at the right time, right? Like they're all playing really good football. I mean, Baltimore boat races Houston, who I think is honestly a disaster right now too. But Kansas City playing the best ball of the season like they typically do in December, and that's just not the case with the Steelers team right now. And that's perplexing because this isn't the first time in the last 4 or 5 years that this has happened. I think I saw something where they've had a 3-game losing streak in December and for the last 4 or 5 of the last 6 years, something like that. I mean, it's felt like that several times, but I guess I hadn't really noticed it. But very you want to be playing your best ball going into the playoffs, and I think that at this point they're almost like backing in to the playoffs, and maybe they get a favorable matchup. But there's just a lot going on with this team right now that's got to get cleaned up. I think the communication errors on the defensive end is the number one thing for me, because if you're going up against these good teams and you got the highest paid defense in the NFL, you can't be beating yourself, man. Like these quarterbacks are too good. The guys that you're going to see in the playoffs are just too good. And I know it's kind of something that I talk a lot about in the offseason, and this isn't me like taking a victory lap by any stretch of the imagination. It's just explaining like my process when I talk about things from a team building standpoint. You'll consistently hear me talk about the fact that you need like a top 10 offense to compete really for a Super Bowl in the modern era. So like that, if the Super Bowl is the ultimate goal for the franchise or for like what you guys are, everybody wants, right? You got to have a top 10 offense. Steelers just don't have anything close to that right now. Like you just look at like they're struggling to put 17 points on the board. And as much as you like, I know the Steelers defense isn't playing very well, especially over the last 2 weeks. Like they have not played well. So they're not playing to the level that they are capable of for sure. But it really doesn't matter. Like I'm not saying it doesn't matter at all, but the offensive side of the ball, it's still not up to the level that's going to be able to put them into that true like contender status, in my opinion. And it's tough. It's really tough to build a team without an elite quarterback. You look at even Philly's done a great job with it, but even like Detroit, for example, like with Jared Goff, who's like a solid starter, but they've constructed that roster just amazing. Like they've got hardly any holes, and they've been able to withstand a number of different injuries. It's tough to do that. Like when you're not picking in the top of the draft. I mean, Detroit got all that draft capital in the Stafford trade, and they've hit home runs in the draft. And these are more conversations for the offseason, but it's just something to keep in mind. Like I just think that when you're going up against the top teams in the NFL, like the Steelers have to figure out a way next year. And I'm not writing off the fact that they could potentially win a playoff game or anything like that. I just think that it's pretty clear that they're pretty far off from the true contenders of the NFL this year. I think next year, like the goal has to be like, all right, what do we have to do to get a top 10 offense? Now, what they do with the quarterback situation, I think Russell will be back, but how they're going to build this out and try to get back to like scoring enough points to where they can at least compete with some of these teams, because the defense, even if they play well, like you're not going to win, 17, 13 games in the playoffs. It just doesn't happen. Quarterbacks are too good. So, but anyways, that's my kind of elongated rant to end. I know there's a lot of frustration among the fan base. I saw it all over social media yesterday. So I really appreciate you guys tuning in to the recap, especially after losses like this, because I know it's tough. But I think it's healthy discourse to talk about things, hopefully in as much of a level-headed manner as I can. So hopefully you all had a good holiday. Again, I appreciate your all's continued support throughout the year, and I will holler at you guys soon. Peace and love.